Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Hello and welcome to the Encounter program. I am Reverend Rachel Helgeson, and today we're doing a continuation of a previous show with Reverend Dr. Barry Downing. Reverend Dr. Downing is a friend and a colleague in ministry, which we say as Presbyterians that we will be colleagues in ministry. And it's nice when that works out to be friendship too. But also Reverend Dr. Downing was the pastor at the congregation. I'm currently the pastor at Northminster Presbyterian Church. He is our pastor emeritus. That's a way of saying that he did a good job and he's still loved, even though he is not in the pulpit. So, but you may not know, if you're just jumping in with us today and didn't get to hear the last segment, is that Reverend Dr. Downing has a PhD from Edinburgh, and his background is both in theology and in science, and has particularly written on UFOs and unidentified flying objects, particularly in response to what does that have to do with faith, with religion, and his own studies in that. So welcome back, Barry. I'm so glad that you're here again and be able to chat again. It just felt like we didn't have enough time last time to talk about all the things.
Yeah, we'll do better today, I hope.
Well, maybe, right? So I'm going to pull up a slide. It's the Red Sea. I think it's the first one that you, and we'll talk a little bit about that while I get that together. Let's see where maybe it'll let me do that. There we go.
All right, what we're doing is reviewing what I said last time. In summary form, I argued that the pillar of cloud led Israel up to the Red Sea and used its propulsion system to split the Red Sea so that the Jewish people could flee from the Egyptians. And in this picture that you see, the Jewish people are going out what is the east end of the Red Sea parting, and the armies of Egypt are being battered by some kind of power that's coming down from the pillar of cloud, or the Exodus UFO, as I call it. What this power is, I'm not sure, but I believe it was some type of heat mechanism that caused the wheels of the chariots to lock up or freeze up. And my guess is that it was some type of heat mechanism, because modern UFOs, when they land, often absolutely dry out the ground underneath them because of the amount of heat they give off. In any case, anybody who would hear this would say, well, that's pretty speculative, we can't go back to the parting of the Red Sea and figure out if it really happened or not. And I would say that's true, both scientifically and probably from a faith point of view. But let me say this, suppose that you were in a home and you heard a gunshot, and you raced upstairs, ran into a room, and there was a dead person lying on the floor and a man standing holding a smoking gun. You would now be a witness, okay? And you might go to court and be called upon to witness, and you would say, I saw the dead body and I saw the guy standing there holding the smoking gun. And this will go to trial. And on the jury, you might have a scientist who would say, well, I don't believe we really have proof here, because the witness did not see the shot take place. The witness only saw the smoking guns, and this is true. But the other 11 people might vote to convict based on the fact that the gun was smoking. That's good enough evidence for me. What I believe is that the United States Pentagon has seen the smoking gun, by which I mean they've seen the UFOs. They've had over 70 years to study what makes them fly, what their power is. And I suspect the Pentagon has already discussed whether or not these UFOs would have the power to part the Red Sea. And so if the Pentagon told us what they know, I believe we would at least have a smoking gun. We wouldn't be able to fly back 3,000 years to see the Red Sea part, but we would have a pretty good idea that the parting of the Red Sea was done by a power very similar to what's flying in our skies right now. Would theologians be happy to hear this? Not some of them. Let me read you something from Bishop John Shelby Spong, who wrote a book called Why Christianity Must Change or Die. He wrote this in 1998. Unfortunately for Bishop Spong, he died this past September. But let me read to you what he said. This almighty deity, who also appeared in the sacred text to have had a not so noble political and moral agenda. The biblical God is portrayed as having had power to split the Red Sea, to allow the chosen ones to walk through on dry ground. And in this same sacred text, the Red Sea was also closed by the God just in time to drown the hated Egyptians. What kind of almighty power is this? Is it even ethical? Is one capable of worshiping so capricious a deity who appears to embody the worst of our human tribal and political hatreds? So what do we mean then when we call God Almighty in the Christian Creed? That's on page 9 in Bishop Spong's book. My point is that a lot of liberal theologians would not be pleased at all to discover the parting of the Red Sea really happened. This raises all kinds of questions for their understanding of God. And one of the things Bishop Spong does not like is the idea that God has chosen people. Eric von Daniken in Chariots of God is likewise troubled by the idea of God having chosen people. What kind of God have we got? A God who has favorites? I don't want this kind of God. Well, it's a little weird to me that you can't allow God to make choices. We have elections in the United States. Does this mean that every time you vote for your favorite person, you're being immoral because you're selecting one over another? You know, give me a break. You know, if we can make choices, why can't God make choices? My view of the Jewish people is that the world is God's classroom, and the Jews were the kids chosen to go to God's blackboard to write on the blackboard God's commandments, as well as God's punishments for breaking the commandments. That's my understanding of the Jews as chosen people. And I don't think God is being immoral by having chosen people. And I don't think God is being immoral by drowning the Egyptians in the Red Sea. Okay, Rachel, we can go on to number 6, Sinai.
That's a pretty big statement, Barry, that you just made there. So.
Well, yes. You know, after more than 50 years, you're less afraid to make big statements, okay?
Where did Sinai go? Oh, there it is. Okay. I'm curious.
Right, what we're going to see next is a picture of the pillar cloud of fire on a high mountain, the mountain being Sinai, and you'll see the tents of Israel at the foot of the mountain. When we get to Mount Sinai, God seems, you know, a little different. In the book of Genesis, when God and two friends came to meet Abraham and Sarah, you know, he drops in and has lunch, and he seems quite casual and friendly and not too dangerous. Well, when we get to Mount Sinai, suddenly God becomes dangerous. And of course, God was dangerous at the Red Sea in terms of what he did to the Egyptians, and also he was dangerous at Passover, killing off the firstborn. But in any case, when we get to Mount Sinai, God makes it even dangerous when you're the people of God to come near God. He sets kind of a border around the foot of the mountain and gives express orders that none of the Israelites are to come up the mountain except Moses. So Moses is the one chosen, again, chosen people within chosen people. Moses was chosen to go to the top of the mountain and meet with God or the angels of God in the pillar, cloud, and fire. Along with this, there came a lot of thunderings and lightnings and smoke going up. The pillar of cloud, which hadn't made any noise up till now, suddenly is very, very noisy. What's going on here? I think it's a display of power. And the God we see meeting with Sarah and Abraham seems to be a little spooky because he can read Sarah's mind, but he doesn't seem all that dangerous. Suddenly the God at Mount Sinai is dangerous. You will die if you try to come up this mountain and get near God. So we have a view of God as dangerous to most people. Not dangerous to Moses. Why? Because he's chosen by God to be the mediator between us and God's own self, or between us and God's angels. In any case, it is here that the Ten Commandments are given. The instructions on building the tabernacle, which is the house of worship of the Jewish people, was built. It also was where the other commandments of the Jewish religion were given. In some ways, the wilderness is kind of anti the Garden of Eden, whereas the Garden of Eden had every good thing you could possibly want to eat, and you're only given one forbidden commandment: thou shalt not eat the forbidden fruit. Welcome to the wilderness, where there's nothing to eat unless God gives it to you, and where there are 613 commandments of the Jewish religion, not just one, thou shalt not. And so the wilderness journey shows another side to God, very much another side. A God who brought us out into this wilderness to test us, to do us good in the end. That's Deuteronomy 8, verse 16, which is kind of the verse I hold on to through all my own testing. In any case,
if you're joining us now, I'm Reverend Rachel Helgeson, and this is Reverend Dr. Barry Downing. We are talking about Perry's background is in science and in theology. He's a pastor at Northminster Presbyterian Church and has been recognized internationally for his work and study on UFOs, and particularly in relationship to religion and faith. We've talked already about the Red Sea, and now we're talking about Sinai, and Barry was talking about how, in relation to particularly with more conservative theologians and more progressive theologians, how this idea and this thought process and the research that Barry has done can challenge that, and he can understand. For some of y'all out there might be wondering, what is Barry talking about? And he's trying to give you examples of where he's done research specifically in Scripture and the Bible. And our first segment went over a number of things in the Hebrew Bible, and we're still currently in the Hebrew Bible. And Barry, would you like to read the Exodus 33 text?
Yes, why don't you put up the tabernacle? While they were in the wilderness, Moses received instructions on building the tabernacle, which was a tent where worship would take place. This is where the Holy of Holies would be. This is where the Ark of the Covenant would be held, okay? Here, this is the one after. We need to go back to tabernacle.
Sure.
This is Exodus 33. Please see if you can go back to tabernacle. That's a very nice painting. I want them to see tabernacle.
So
can you do that?
Yep, I have it there up for you. If you could describe the painting for us. There's tents around in the background, and there's
right. Okay. Well, Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp far, and he called it the tent of meeting. And everyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent of meeting, which is outside the camp. Moses went out to the tent. All the people rose up and worshiped at the door of the tent and looked after Moses until he had gone into the tent. Moses entered the tent. The pillar of cloud would head down in front of the tent, and the Lord would speak with Moses. And when the pillar of cloud was standing at the door of the tent, And all the people would rise up and worship, every man at his tent door. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, as a man speaks to his friend. And so that's Moses in Exodus 33. What I think any person in the 21st century would do if they could go back in time and see this scene, they would conclude that the cloud was some type of UFO. When it came down to the door of the tent, Moses talked to an ET, an extraterrestrial, that was in the UFO. This is what was described in the previous previous screening. The pillar cloud is hovering above the tabernacle. You see the tents of Israel off to the right. And this is done by Lynn Merrifield, a friend of mine who did several paintings that relate UFOs to the Bible. The basic story was that they could take the tent down fairly quickly and move to a new location. And they did this for 40 years. The book of Numbers has a chapter in it, number 9, beginning at verse 15, where the pillar of cloud is said to hover over the tabernacle, over the tent, maybe for several days at a time. And then the UFO moves on and they collapse the tent. And Israel collapsed all of their personal tents and they take off and follow the pillar of cloud. So we have a scene of playing follow the leader for 40 years. That's the story the Bible gives us. And the Christian hymn, Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah, is based on this image of following the pillar of cloud for 40 years. I think if we see how the pillar of cloud is described to act and how it looks like modern UFOs sound to me. And so this is why I think we need to pay attention to this. All right, you want to go on to chariots is the next, next image. At the very same year that my book, The Bible and Flying Saucers, was published, Eric von Daniken's book, Chariots of the Gods, was published. Chapter 4 in his book is entitled, Was God an Astronaut? And what von Daniken argues is that when Ezekiel saw the wheel, he saw a being or a person in the UFO, the wheel within a wheel, the wheel Exodus, not Exodus UFO, but the wheel of Ezekiel. And that Ezekiel treated the being as like God. But we know this was not God. The God of the universe doesn't need to ride around in a flying saucer or something like that. Give me a break. This is, the biblical people were primitive technologically, so they just kind of projected the idea of God onto any beings that flew to meet them in any kind of spaceship. That means that the biblical religion, from Van Daniken's point of view, is an accident. The biblical people accidentally worship these beings because they didn't know any better. My argument is the beings in the UFOs brought about the Jewish religion on purpose. It was deliberate. It was not an accident. And so we need to ask the question, why were they doing this? Were they sent by God? Are these agents of God? Are these missionaries of God? Are modern UFO beings? And that's the question that I think the church should be discussing, and it's not. It's the question I think Jewish and Christian people both should be discussing, and we're not. So that's kind of it. I don't have a lot of time to talk about the New Testament. UFOs in the New Testament are trickier. You could say there is a UFO that confronted the shepherds at the birth of Jesus, maybe a UFO at the baptism of Jesus when the Spirit of God descended like a dove. Very definitely a UFO at the transfiguration of Jesus in Matthew chapter 17. But the important one is, I think, Matthew 28, which is a view of the resurrection of Jesus. Do you have 28? Can you put up?
That's what I'm trying to pull up right now.
Okay. Well, we have in 28, in Matthew chapter 28, On the morning of the third day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to the tomb. And suddenly an angel of the Lord descended from heaven, rolled back the stone, and sat upon it. And for fear of him, the guards trembled and became like dead men. And the angel, of course, said, "Fear not, for he is not here, he is risen." So this was the message at the resurrection of Jesus from an angel. And this painting was done for me by Lynn Merrifield, as has done the other ones. Notice in the scene, the angel is kind of sitting on the rock, and the angel looks like he's wearing a spacesuit, and this is fine. And the angel looks a little bit like the angel did back in Genesis 18 with Abraham. But in any case, we've got Mary Magdalene in the foreground. Notice the soldiers have dropped their shields and are standing there, but not doing anything. In modern UFO reports, when humans confront ETs, sometimes the humans are frozen in place. They can see what's going on. Their mind is working fine, but they can't move their bodies. And I suspect that's what we have going on when it says that the guards became like dead men. They didn't fall down. They stood in place and were frozen. They could see what's going on, but they could not use any weapons to stop the angelic being or the extraterrestrial that rolled back the stone. After the women went away and the angel went away, the soldiers went and explained what had happened. And then we have our first UFO cover story, because the authorities told the guards to say that the disciples came by night and stole the body, and we'll pay you to keep your mouth shut, and we'll make sure you have no trouble with the authorities. And so there we are. It wasn't swamp gas. It wasn't food. It was the disciples came and stole the body. Okay, you could go ahead with questions or other stuff that maybe I've said you think I should try to clarify.
Sure. So Barry, I guess one of the things, you've done a very thorough research, but one of the things I wonder is, how did you come to be able to bring your background in theology and in science and start to become intrigued with what the possibilities of life beyond Earth and how that could be connected together with your own theological and scientific understandings?
All right. Started with my father bringing me UFO books to read when I was in high school, 1955, 1956, Donald Kehoe books. Donald Kehoe says, we've got flying saucers here, they're real, they're from outer space, and the government is lying about it. And that hasn't changed, okay? So I started out believing they're real and believing there was a cover-up. I had a scholarship in physics, which is why I majored in physics in college. And then in seminary, I was doing regular seminary work. I was in a class my senior year on the creeds. Philip Schaff's Creeds of Christendom was our text. I think it's a 2-volume set. The professor in the class said one day, "No one today believes in the ascension, do they? And if Jesus did not ascend to heaven, where is his body? We may only suppose his bones lie buried somewhere in the Middle East." This is a small class. I'd never heard this in any other class. I think he was just giving us insights into how things really were, okay? A voice in my mind said, "Barry, what are you going to say at Grandma's funeral? You know, we used to think Grandma died and went to heaven, but now we know, no heaven, no resurrection, too bad, bye Grandma." I didn't like that. And I thought, the Christian faith has no foundation. You aren't just going to worship a dead Jesus, you know?
Right.
And so how can I go and be a pastor like this? So I went to the University of Edinburgh to study the relation between science and religion, because the professor had said the reason we don't believe in the ascension is biblical people believed in a 3-story universe, heaven above, hell below, and earth in the middle. And then along came Copernicus, and we know better now. In fact, we now know there is no up. The earth rotates on its axis, up keeps changing. So, okay. Anyway, so I got to Edinburgh to study eschatology, time and space. That's what I told Professor McIntyre and Professor Torrance. And I wanted to do it on contemporary ideas about time and space. And Professor Torrance said to me, "You're too young. We're going to put you back in the 17th century. We're going to have you study eschatology, time and space, and Isaac Newton." So that's what I did for 3 years. During my last year in Edinburgh, October of '65, I started thinking, what if you kind of wrote a science fiction book about ETs coming to Earth and starting the biblical religion? That could probably work. And then I started looking at some of the UFOs in the Bible, like the pillar cloud and the fire. And then I thought, oh my goodness, it's not science fiction. So I was scared, actually. And I did a little prayer that went something like this: "Oh God, should I quit my PhD studies now and go home and write Bible and Flying Saucers?" And there was silence. And so I made a silent deal with God. Okay, let me finish my PhD and I'll go home and do the book. And so I finished my PhD, went home and did the book.
So that was the beginning.
That was the beginning. 1968, it was published.
Wow. And I know you've written more since then too. You've written other books and other articles and spoken in different venues internationally. And actually, ironically, the pandemic has allowed for some more freedom to speak internationally with things like this, where you can use Zoom or Teams or whatever format folks have.
Right. In just the last couple of months, I did an interview by StreamYard from Brazil and another interview by Zoom from Italy. So yes, I don't know. Part of the problem is that religious people don't want to deal with UFOs, and UFO people don't want to deal with religion. So it's kind of like I'm in a very narrow market here,
You're a party of one.
That's right. That's how it feels.
Well, friends, we're so glad that you were able to join us today. I had the pleasure of interviewing not once, but twice, Reverend Dr. Barry Downing, who lives in the Endwell area and is a scholar and has a PhD and has been pulling all of himself together in his research, both in science and in theology. And many of you may know him as the pastor emeritus of Northminster Presbyterian Church, but Barry is certainly more than that. He is thoughtful about what he's doing, and also, as you heard, party of one, but he's willing to sit there and be the party of one that speaks up and has his moment to be able to explain what he's researched and what he has learned. And if you have any more questions about it, I'm sure that Barry would be open to you hearing some of his. You have a podcast, right? Or you were on a podcast recently, Barry, if you'd like to learn.
I have. Well, okay. Do www.thebibleandflyingsaucers.com, and that will give you my page that has quite a bit of stuff on it.
So we encourage you to visit him there, and if you'd like to learn a little bit more. Thank you so much, Barry. I'm so glad we got to chat one more time.